I was working the front desk at a hostel in Amsterdam when an American family arrived at around 11:30 at night. The dad had on flip-flops and a college sweatshirt, his wife had rollerblades tied to her bag, and their teenage son was casually eating a whole rotisserie chicken he'd somehow picked up. The dad looked at me and said, "Hey man, we didn't book anything, but we're free-spirited travelers. We just go wherever the wind takes us. Got any beds?" I told him we were completely full. He stared at me like I'd just told him the moon had disappeared. "But we're here now," he said. "We're spontaneous. That's what traveling is about." I explained that showing up in Amsterdam in August without a reservation usually meant sleeping on a bench. He got irritated. "Back home, we don't schedule things like robots. We're free souls." His wife nodded like he had just delivered some deep life lesson. Meanwhile, their son dropped chicken grease on the floor. They eventually left to try somewhere else. Later, I found out they paid €200 for a last-minute room the size of a broom closet. Freedom comes at a price. Another time, I was a tour guide in Prague. An American couple joined the walking tour 15 minutes late. They didn't apologize. They just walked up and cut me off mid-sentence to ask where the bathroom was. I pointed them toward a cafe. They came back 10 minutes later, upset. "Why do we have to pay to use a toilet?" the husband said. "That's a scam. In America, bathrooms are free. That's what freedom means." I tried to explain that public restrooms cost money to maintain in Europe. He interrupted. "No, you guys accept this because you don't question anything. We think for ourselves." Then he tried to relieve himself behind a statue. A police officer had to stop him. His wife defended him, saying he was expressing his personal liberty. The officer wasn't amused. My roommate worked at a restaurant in Barcelona and told me about an American who refused to order off the menu. He wanted a cheeseburger with extra pickles and a vanilla milkshake. She explained they didn't have that. He said, "Look, I'm American. I don't follow rules just because they exist. I make my own choices. Can't you just make what I want?" She told him this wasn't a fast food chain. He left a 1-star review, saying the restaurant lacked freedom and flexibility. I once saw an American in a Berlin grocery store, trying to return opened food. The cashier said no. He argued for 10 minutes. I tasted it and didn't like it. In America, the customer decides. I stand by my independence. I don't let stores tell me what I can and can't do. Security eventually escorted him out, while he held a half-eaten pretzel and shouted about his rights. All these stories have the same theme: Americans doing whatever they want and calling it independence. But independence isn't the same thing as chaos. And the rest of the world is watching, absolutely baffled. I lived in London for a while, and one day on the tube an American tourist started loudly explaining to her friend that the Underground was copied from New York's subway system. A British man politely told her that the London Underground was actually the first of its kind. She shook her head and said, "No, sweetie, America invented modern transportation." He didn't reply. He just put his headphones in and stared into the void. Another American one met insisted that Big Ben was the King's house. When someone explained it was actually the name of the bell inside the clock tower, he argued, "Well, that's dumb. They should have named it something normal." As if centuries of history were supposed to adjust themselves for his convenience. At a museum in Florence, I saw an American woman touching a 500-year-old sculpture. A guard rushed over and told her not to touch anything. She sighed dramatically and said, "Relax, it's old. What's the worst that could happen?" Then she said the museum should be more interactive. "Ma'am, it's not an escape room." Another time in Paris, a guy complained that the wine tasting portion was too small and asked for a normal American-sized glass. The sommelier explained it was a tasting. The guy scoffed. "In America, we know how to pour." His girlfriend whispered, "Babe, we're embarrassing ourselves," and he replied, "No, they need to learn customer service." Once, while waiting in line at the Eiffel Tower, an American teenager asked if the tower was the original one, or if this was a replica like the one in Vegas. His mum genuinely wasn't sure. I even met an American in Greece who tried to tip a police officer so he could park wherever he wanted. The officer told him that wasn't allowed. The American said, "I'm helping you out. It's called gratitude." The officer told him he could show gratitude by following the law. I worked with a Spanish tour guide who told me about an American that argued with him about his own country's history. The guide said the Moors ruled parts of Spain for centuries. The American said, "No, they didn't. I would have learned that in school." The guide simply smiled and continued the tour with the calmness of a man who had given up long ago. But the wildest are the Americans who go abroad and become instant experts on that country after being there for 24 hours. They start explaining customs to the locals. They start correcting people on their own language. They act like Google Translate, and 3 YouTube videos made them cultural historians. I once met an American in Switzerland who insisted Swiss trains weren't actually that punctual. A Swiss guy overheard and said, "The train you missed left exactly on time. You were late." The American replied, "Well, in America the train waits a minute." The Swiss man just blinked. "That's why your trains are late." A friend of mine works at a cafe in Copenhagen. She served an American who ordered a latte, took one sip and said, "This tastes different. Can you make it like Starbucks?" She explained they used local beans and didn't copy Starbucks recipes. He said, "But I like what I like. Isn't Denmark supposed to be the happiest country? Make me happy." Another friend in Istanbul told me about an American who got upset that the call to prayer was too loud near his hotel. He went downstairs to complain, and the receptionist had to explain, "Sir, that's not us. That's the city." He said, "Can you turn it down?" As if the entire culture was a playlist he could adjust. In Tokyo, I saw an American couple walk into a quiet shrine and start shouting because the koi fish looked fake. A monk approached them and gently asked them to lower their voices. The husband said, "We're just being enthusiastic. That's part of our culture." The monk nodded slowly, like he'd unlocked a new level of patience. A German coworker once told me about an American who refused to sort his trash. "I'm not doing this recycling puzzle," he said. "This is why freedom exists." When the coworker explained it was the law, the American said, "What are you gonna do, arrest me for garbage?" Spoiler, they didn't arrest him, but they did make him redo it. In Barcelona, a woman asked why everything was closed in the afternoon. The waiter told her it was siesta time. She said, "Well, that's inconvenient for tourists. Can't you guys adjust the schedule?" The waiter smiled politely, one of those smiles that hide several rude thoughts. And then there are the geography moments. A tourist in Brussels asked me how to get to London by bus. I said, "You have to cross the English Channel." She said, "Is that a bridge?" I stared at her for a good 3 seconds, trying to decide if she was joking. She wasn't. Another guy in Rome wanted to know why all the old buildings were still standing. He said, "In America we rebuild things. Why don't you guys just start fresh?" An Italian woman next to him muttered, "Because we have history." I think my favorite was a woman in Paris who thought the Louvre was small. She said she finished the whole museum in 30 minutes. Ma'am, you walked past priceless art like you were browsing a sale rack. One time in Ireland, I heard an American complain that the countryside looked too green, as if nature itself needed to tone it down. The tour driver laughed and said, "We'll let the grass know." She didn't get the joke. She just said, "I'm serious. It's almost neon." In Norway, an American couple kept asking why the fjords didn't have more restaurants with views. The guide explained that the fjords are natural landscapes. The husband said, "Yeah, but imagine a Hard Rock cafe right there." The guide physically shuddered. A friend who works in tourism in Budapest told me about an American who demanded they turn down the church bells because they rang too early. When told it was tradition, he said, "Well, traditions should be updated." "Yes, sir. Let's just email the entire history of Europe and ask it to reschedule." And the most common thing? Americans get surprised when people in other countries don't instantly switch to English. I once saw a guy in Lisbon speak slower and louder at a waiter who didn't understand him, as if yelling English magically downloads the language into someone's brain. Another time in Vienna, a tourist complained that the pastries weren't sweet enough and asked why they didn't taste more American. The baker just said, "Because we are Austrian." The guy said, "Well, you'd get more customers if you changed it." Sir, they've been making those pastries for centuries. They're doing fine. But the one that lives rent-free in my mind is an American in a Rome cafe, who stormed up to the counter because he didn't get iced coffee. He said, "This is hot." I ordered coffee. The barista said, "Yes, this is how we serve it." The man, genuinely confused, said, "Well, how do you expect people to drink this?" "Sir, Italy has been drinking hot espresso since before your country even existed. I promise they've figured it out. I've met wonderful Americans abroad, polite, curious, respectful. But I've also seen the type who treat every country like it's a theme park built just for them. And when they do that, people notice. Because traveling isn't about making everywhere feel like home. It's about understanding that the world is bigger than you, and sometimes the wind doesn't take you where you want. Sometimes it just shows you how everyone else lives, whether you're ready for it or not."